Hello and welcome to this Tungsten Cluster Masterclass training where we're going to look at the use of the Tungsten Cluster TMI or Tungsten Machine Image. My name is Chris Parker, VP of Customer Success here at Continuant. So in this short course we're going to define what the TMI actually is. We're going to recap the topologies available that you can launch using the TMI, and then we'll look at the TMI itself in more detail, manual deployment, CloudFormation deployment, and I'll give a small demonstration on how to launch a cluster using the TMI. So what is it? What is the TMI? Well, it's the Tungsten Machine Image. Basically in Amazon they call it an AMI, and in Google marketplaces it's the various images that you can launch there. So the TMI is a pre-built image available in Amazon and in the Google marketplaces that will launch a Tungsten cluster for you. So one single image would launch one host. You would launch multiple images, configure them, and you'll have a ready-to-go Tungsten cluster. They run on Rocky Linux, currently using MySQL 8.0 and the latest versions of Tungsten cluster, such as 8.0.1. It's a very simple to follow launch wizard when you start the image up and you connect, or you can even deploy using CloudFormation within AWS. The cluster will be up and running in a matter of minutes, and it will also include the Tungsten dashboard, so you can see the availability and manage the cluster through the dashboard. It's available at very cheap hourly pricing, so if you're looking for a cluster just for a short period of time, it could be more cost effective than a full annual subscription. And we also have free trials available if you contact Continuant Sales directly. So what cluster topologies can we launch using the TMI? Well, first of all, you can launch a standalone cluster, so the typical minimum 3 nodes, which would have one primary node, a minimum of 2 replicas. You can launch more nodes for this standard cluster if you want, but you do need to make sure there is an odd number of nodes to maintain quorum. And this cluster would typically sit within a single data center or a single region. We also then have the active-passive topology. So again, you would have 2 clusters with at least 3 nodes per cluster. One of those clusters would be the active cluster, one cluster would be the passive cluster. This can be cross-region, so if you're deploying this in AWS, for example, you can deploy 3 nodes using the TMI in, for example, US East, and then you could, for example, deploy 3 nodes of the AMI in Ireland, in Europe, configure them, and they all work together. So yeah, it can be cross-region, cross-AZ, etc. Very simple to use and implement. A single writable primary, so all the writes will go to that primary cluster. All the reads will be distributed across both clusters depending upon where the connectors sit. Managed cross-site replication, perfect for disaster recovery, geo-distributed configurations, and so you can have more than 3 nodes per cluster, and you can have more than 2 clusters if you wish. You can deploy multiple of these clusters to suit. One step further from that, then we have the active-active topology. Same rules apply, minimum 2 clusters, minimum 3 nodes per cluster. In this instance, all clusters are writable, so writes can go to both. Cross-region, geo-distributed, easy to set up using the TMI. Obviously you have multiple writable primaries. Managed cross-site replication, it's all available within the dashboard that comes with the TMI as well. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with these topologies. We've covered the concepts of the topologies, the prerequisites, and all those things that you need to know in various training sessions. These are the 3 default topologies that are available using the TMI. The TMI deploys all of the prerequisites for you, and it deploys MySQL for you, so you don't need to worry about having all of that set up. So how do you actually deploy it? Well, there are 2 ways. Within Google and within AWS, you can do the manual deployment. So first of all, you need to find the TMI in the marketplace. So if you go to the respective marketplaces and just search for Tungsten Cluster, and you'll see the image there, you would subscribe to it, and then you would launch the instances. As I say, you need at least 3 instances per cluster. So if you're just doing a standalone cluster, launch the 3 instances, and then you can go through and configure it. You need to make sure the networking is all set up so that all of those nodes can communicate to each other. Security rules between the nodes, make sure they're all set up. And then once you've got all that ready, you connect to each node individually via a terminal session and follow the launch wizard that will be presented. It will ask you various questions. Once it's done, it will install and launch that cluster for you. And I'm going to show you that in a demonstration shortly. If you are in AWS, you can launch via CloudFormation. Obviously, this is AWS only, but first of all, you need to subscribe to the TMI in the same way through that marketplace. And then you can use any of these 3 links to launch the CloudFormation templates, either a single cluster, an active-passive, or an active-active cluster. Once you launch that, there'll be various options where you need to fill all the details in, and then it will build a full stack deployment for you. It will set up the VPCs, the gateways. It distributes the hosts across availability zones. At the moment, active-active and active-passive via CloudFormation can only be within the same region. So if you do want a multi-region distribution, you need to follow the manual steps, which I'll demonstrate shortly. But the CloudFormation makes it a lot easier for you. It sets up all of the networking and has all that ready to go. And when I say that it distributes across multiple AZs, an example here is if you launched a single 3-node cluster through the CloudFormation, you would have a primary node and one of the replicas would go in one AZ and the other replica would go in the other AZ, and that's all automatically taken care of for you through that CloudFormation template. So let's move on to a demonstration of how to do a manual deployment. Now, first of all, I've already launched 3 nodes. I've got 3 nodes running and I've got them ready to go. So I'm not going to go through the registration and subscription in the marketplace. That's already been done. So let me just switch to my screens. Okay, so here we go. I've got 3 terminal sessions open. I have my SSH connection using my key, and then it's the Rocky @ and then the public IP address of the 3 nodes. So for this demonstration, my nodes are in Amazon. So I've put all that in, so let me connect, and it just wants me to authenticate. So just go on there. Okay, and the first thing that happens is you'll be connected to the hosts as the Rocky user. Okay. Once on there, we just work on one host at a time. You can start on any host that you want. I'll start on this middle one just for simplicity and keep it central to the screen. I'm just going to make this screen a little bit bigger so you can see what we're doing. And the first thing we're going to do is sudo su -tungsten. So we're going to connect to these new hosts as that Tungsten operating system user. Now, I'm running this on my internal continuant network, so it's given me a slightly different option here. When you launch this, the first thing you'll be displayed here is a README file, which will explain all of the various things that you need to have prepared in advance, which is basically just making sure that network connectivity is set up. We'll then start the build wizard. So the first thing we're saying is the current host name is this, and the IP address. This is the internal IP address of the host is this. Do we want to change the host name? I'm going to say yes. I tend to prefer to choose my own host names rather than use the AWS default ones. So I'm just going to call this node DB2. So it will change that host name for me. Okay, next question. Would you like to enable SSL security for this service? On all of the questions, the default option, if I press enter without typing anything else, is in uppercase. Okay. I don't actually want to set up SSL security for this. I want to keep this demonstration simple and straightforward. SSL has a few more steps that we cover in the SSL training sessions. So for this one, I'm just going to say no. And then what kind of topology would I like to deploy? The default, if I don't press anything, is 1, but I can choose 1, 2, or 3 for a standalone cluster, Composite Active-Passive, or Composite Active-Active cluster. So I'm going to choose the default of 1. How many nodes am I configuring? Default 3, so I'm just going to press enter on that. Please enter the service name for this cluster. So I'm going to call this cluster Alpha. This is just the unique service name for the cluster as a whole. So will this host, DB2, be a primary node or a replica node? Obviously those roles change throughout the lifetime of a cluster, but this is the initial role that the node will take on the very first, when we very first start it up. DB2, let's make this the primary node. So I'm just going to press enter and let it be the primary node. Okay, so primary node for Alpha will be this host. So now it wants me to put in the details of the replica nodes. So what is going to be the host name of replica node 1? So I'm going to call replica node 1 DB1, and it wants to know what's the internal IP address. So over here on this left hand side, the IP address there is 10.2.3.192. And then we want the host name for replica 2, so I'm going to call that DB3, and that IP there is the other host, 10.2.3.146. What's the THL port? You would never really need to change the THL port, but if your networking configuration means that you need to use something other than the default 2112, you can specify that here, but I'm just going to accept the default. I'm also going to leave the MySQL port on the default of 13306. So MySQL is installed on these hosts and is configured with default parameters, one of them being the port number 13306. I haven't changed that. I don't intend to change that. I'll leave that at the default. What port do you want the connector to run on by default? I'm going to leave it again as the default of 3306. So when the connectors start up, your applications will connect to the connectors on this port to be routed through to the cluster. By default, the connectors are enabled in bridge mode. Do we want to leave that as the default, or do we want to change it? Do you want to switch to proxy mode? I'm going to say no. I'm just going to leave everything as the default in bridge mode. THL log retention. How long do we want to keep THL logs for? Default is 7 days. I would recommend you just leave it at the default for the time being. You can decrease it or increase it, but doing so has implications for storage. So if you keep the THL logs for longer, obviously that requires more storage. If you reduce the number, it reduces the storage. Obviously, you want to ensure that you always have enough THL logs for recovery if anything goes wrong. As long as the THL logs exist, we can recover if we need to. It's a similar concept to binary logs. So, how long do you keep binary logs for? Generally, keep the binary logs and THL logs for the same number of days, so they're always in sync. So what's the database user for the cluster? The default is Tungsten user, and this is the username that the managers and all the components are going to connect to the database with. It does need to be a super user. By default, this script will create this user for you and set up all those permissions. So this is really just asking for what is the username and password you want to set that user for. So we're going to leave it as the default Tungsten, and then it just wants us to create a password for it. So I'll just pop that in, and you have to repeat that a second time. And then we need a default user for the connectors. So default app user, I'm going to leave that default, and then I'll put in the password again here. Now it wants to know what username we want to set up for the API. Again, I'll just use the default Tungsten, pop in the password. And then finally, we need a password for the dashboard. The username for that is Tungsten, that can't be changed. And this is just creating a password for us to use to connect. Okay, so once that's done, the rest of the wizard now, first of all, makes a connection to the other two hosts to make sure that they're reachable and they're online. It then sets up some controls for the dashboard, sets up HA proxy for the dashboard, and it then restarts MySQL. The reason it does this is every node, every MySQL instance within a cluster needs a unique server ID, and obviously until you've told it how many nodes are within that cluster, it doesn't know what those server IDs need to be, so it sets them all up after the case. As part of the installation, it will create some tables within the local MySQL instance, which will hold the configuration information. And that is then used so that when we go to now configure the replica nodes, we don't have to go through this wizard and answer all of these questions again. So if I go to, for example, DB1, if I now connect as the Tungsten user, it automatically picks up that the configuration is available in its database and runs through it. So it's not going to ask me, do you want to set this up? What are the usernames and passwords and all of that kind of stuff? It will just do it all for you. And the same thing on DB3. And if you were doing an active-passive cluster or an active-active cluster, when it was asking me for the host names, it will do the same thing, but it will ask you for all of the host names in both clusters, and it will set everything up for you. So you run through the wizard on one node, and then on all of the other nodes, it picks that configuration up and runs it for you. So we've gone through that. The wizard has run on all three. I'm just going to exit out of here, log back in again, and we can see that the host names have changed. So DB1, DB2, DB3, which is what we want. So now we actually need to install the software. So the output from the wizard tells us that the host has been configured. First of all, complete the installation on all nodes. So you log into the remaining hosts in the clusters. Configuration will complete automatically. So that's what I did. I just logged into DB1 and DB3. It picked up all that configuration information that's applied and built the configuration, changed the host names, and got us ready to go. We're now ready to actually do the installation itself. Once we've completed the installation, we can run the environment script to set the environment up, and then we can start all of the software. And then if we want to connect to the dashboard, this is how we connect to the dashboard using this URL. Okay, so first of all, let's do the installation. So I'm going to go to cd opt continuant software tungsten clustering for MySQL tools tpm install, and that will install the software based on the configuration information we've supplied. It'll just take a moment or two to build the software up. Okay, that's finished on DB1 and DB3, and now it's finished on DB2. So what I'm going to do now is just exit and log back in again to reload that environment, and we're ready to start the software. But one more thing before the information on the screen scrolls off the screen here. There's this at the very end of the installation, you get this little important note, and this is the password of the root user for MySQL on the AMI. And as it says here, it's strongly advised that you reset that and change that. So whatever your organization policies are regarding passwords, you should change this password of the root user once the installation is complete. Okay, so I'm now going to do a start all. And that will start everything for me. It'll start the replicator, it'll start the manager, and it'll start the connectors. The installation automatically registers the software with the system's CTL controls, so that if a node restarts, the components will restart as well. So that's it, the software is running. So I'm just going to take a copy of this URL for the dashboard. Make sure I've got that on my clipboard first. And then let's just check that everything is running. So from DB2, if I do ccTRL, let's log me into the cluster. We can see the service name is alpha. And we can see that all of the nodes are online, and DB2 is indeed the primary node as we set, and everything is good. So what we can do now, your cluster is running, you can start using it, put data in it, have clients connect to it once you've loaded your data, everything is good. So from a dashboard perspective, if I now switch to a browser window, and then from here we can put in the IP address and connect to the node, and we can say here sign in to, so this is the Tungsten username and the password, and that connects us to the dashboard. And the first thing that we see here is the Tungsten dashboard auto configuration is completed, and this is all being done as part of the wizard process when it was setting up HTTPS and everything on there. That's all set up, so we just click here to get started, and it will load our cluster, and there we see alpha. And if we expand this down, we see that indeed DB2 is that primary node, and there we have the dashboard running and ready to control your cluster. And that's it, very, very simple. So you launch those 3 images from the marketplace, either AWS or GCP, Google, both the same. Go through that wizard, put in the details, run it, and your cluster is ready to go. And that's it. So let's switch back to the slides. And from here, just to summarize, so we reviewed the Tungsten Cluster topologies and worked out what a TMI is, looked at the manual deployment, and that's what I demonstrated, the manual deployment, how to configure it, and we talked about a CloudFormation deployment. Very simple, straightforward, and these images are available in AWS today and also in the Google Marketplace. So thank you for listening. I hope you found that useful, and I look forward to speaking to you on another training session in the future. Thank you and goodbye.